You're at your desk when your manager calls you into her office. She closes the door. Your stomach drops for a second. That automatic response you've had for years whenever someone wants to talk privately. But then something different happens. Instead of fear, you feel calm. She starts talking about restructuring, about budget cuts, about difficult decisions. And you're listening, but you're not spiraling. Because somewhere in the back of your mind, there's a number, $10,000. It's sitting in your account, untouched, earning almost nothing in interest. It's not doing anything, except right now, in this moment, it's doing everything. Because you're not begging, you're not panicking, you're listening like someone who has options, and that changes the entire conversation. Here's what most people get wrong about money. They think the milestone that matters is $1 million, or 6 figures, or some amount that lets them retire early and buy things they don't need. They think money is about wealth, but that's not where the real transformation happens. That's not where your brain stops running on survival mode and starts operating like a completely different person. The real number, the one that actually changes how you think, decide, negotiate, and yes, even how you sleep, is $10,000. Not $10,000 a month, not $10,000 in retirement accounts you can't touch, $10,000 in cash, saved, liquid, accessible, sitting in an account, doing absolutely nothing except representing the fact that you are no longer pinned against the wall by your own life. Let me be clear about something up front. $10,000 does not make you rich. It doesn't even make you comfortable. You're not buying a car with it. You're not going on some transformative vacation. You're not investing it all in the stock market or real estate. This money sits there doing nothing. And that's exactly why it does everything. Because what $10,000 actually buys you isn't a thing. It buys you options. And options change your brain chemistry in ways that most people never understand until they experience it themselves. Here's what's happening in your head. Before you have that $10,000, your brain is operating in what psychologists call scarcity mode. When you don't have a financial cushion, every decision triggers a threat assessment. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for long-term planning and rational decision-making, is constantly being overridden by your amygdala, the part that screams danger. Every financial choice becomes a potential crisis. Your tire pressure light comes on, and your nervous system treats it like a predator. Because in a way, it is. It's a threat to your stability. You're not thinking about next year. You're thinking about next Friday. You're not strategizing. You're surviving. And survival mode is expensive. It makes you say yes to overdraft fees because you needed gas. It makes you pay interest because you couldn't cover the full balance. It makes you stay at a job you hate because the fear of 2 weeks without income is unbearable. Studies actually show that financial stress lowers cognitive function by the equivalent of 13 IQ points. 13, that's the difference between thinking clearly and operating in a fog. And it's not because you're bad with money. It's because your brain is spending all its processing power managing fear instead of solving problems. Now here's what changes after you cross $10,000. You sleep differently. Not because your life suddenly became perfect, but because the Tier 1 disasters are covered. Car breaks down, annoying but not devastating. Get sick and miss work? You'll survive. Unexpected bill hits? Frustrating but manageable. The mental space that was occupied by those spinning worst-case scenarios gets freed up. And when your brain stops spending energy on constant vigilance, it starts spending energy on actual strategic thinking. But sleep is just one symptom of a much bigger shift. Let's talk about what $10,000 actually does to your financial behavior and psychology. The first major change is how you make decisions. Before $10,000, every choice is fear-based. Someone offers you a job that pays 15% more. You take it immediately, even if the commute is terrible, even if the culture is toxic, even if it's a dead-end role. Because 15% is 15%, and you can't afford to be selective. After $10,000, you can pause, you can evaluate, you can ask yourself, is this actually moving me forward, or just sideways with more money? And if the answer is sideways, you can say no, because you have 3 to 6 months of runway to find something better. That's leverage, not power, not wealth, just the basic ability to walk away from a bad deal. And the moment you have that ability, everything tilts in your direction. Employers sense it in negotiations. You're not desperate, so you negotiate better. You ask for more. You push back on terms that don't work for you, and you often get what you ask for, because confidence is magnetic in professional settings. Research from Vanguard shows that having just $2,000 in emergency savings increases financial well-being by 21%. $2,000. But when you push that to 6 months of expenses, which for most people is around $10,000, you get another 13% boost. More importantly, you've created enough breathing room that your brain can shift from defense to offense. Here's the second transformation. You stop making expensive decisions. When you have no buffer, desperation makes you costly. You take payday loans. You pay overdraft fees. You put emergencies on credit cards and pay 18% interest. You stay in situations that are slowly draining you because leaving feels too risky. All of these choices are rational when you're in survival mode, but they keep you exactly where you are. After 10,000, these patterns break. You don't need the payday loan because you can cover the gap. You don't hit overdraft because you have margin. You don't carry credit card debt because you can pay it off. And you can leave bad situations, bad jobs, bad housing, bad relationships because you're not financially trapped anymore. Let me give you a concrete example of how this plays out. Your car needs a $1,200 repair. Before 10,000, this is a crisis. You're scrambling to figure out how to pay for it. Maybe you put it on a credit card and pay it off over 6 months at 18% interest, which means you actually paid $1,400 for a $1,200 repair. Or maybe you skip the repair and hope the problem doesn't get worse, which it inevitably does, turning a $1,200 fix into a $3,000 disaster. After 10,000, the same situation is just an inconvenience. You pay for the repair, your emergency fund drops to $8,800, and you rebuild it over the next few months. Total cost, $1,200. No interest, no stress, no secondary problems from avoiding the issue. Same event, completely different financial outcome. This brings us to the third shift. You start thinking in systems instead of crises. Before 10,000, you're playing whack-a-mole with your finances. Something breaks, you fix it. A bill comes, you pay it. You're constantly reacting to whatever pops up next. There's no time to plan because you're too busy putting out fires. After 10,000, you can step back and look at the whole picture. You start asking questions like, why am I paying so much for car insurance? Could I get a better rate somewhere else? Why is my phone bill so high? Are there cheaper options? Why am I renting this expensive apartment when I could find something adequate for less and save the difference? These optimizations might only save you $50 or $100 a month individually, but they compound, and more importantly, you only notice these opportunities when you're not in constant crisis mode. Financial stress narrows your focus to immediate survival. Financial stability expands your focus to strategic improvement. Here's the fourth change, and this one surprises people. You actually spend less money overall, not because you're more restrictive, but because you're less anxious. Before 10,000, spending is often emotional. You buy things to feel better. You treat yourself because you've been stressed and you deserve something nice. You're constantly negotiating with yourself about whether you've earned a purchase. After 10,000, spending becomes boring in the best way possible. You buy what you need. You buy some things you want. But the compulsion fades because you're not trying to medicate stress with consumption anymore. The result is that you naturally spend less without feeling deprived. You also stop obsessing over small expenses and start focusing on big decisions. Before, you're tracking every coffee, counting every dollar at the grocery store, agonizing over whether to buy the name brand or generic cereal. It's exhausting. After 10,000, you stop sweating the $3 decisions because your attention has shifted to the $3,000 decisions, where you live, what you drive, how you allocate your income. The recalibration of attention is incredibly liberating. The fifth transformation is probably the most important. The identity shift. When you save $10,000, you don't just accumulate money. You become a different type of person. You've proven to yourself that you can delay gratification, that you can set a goal and hit it, that you can make a plan and execute it even when it's hard. Most people approach saving like a diet. They cut expenses dramatically, save aggressively for a few months, burn out and go back to old habits. But the people who successfully reach 10,000 don't think of saving as a temporary sacrifice. They think of it as becoming someone different. Someone who saves money, not someone who's trying to save. Someone who does. And that identity changes every subsequent financial decision you make. You don't blow $100 on something random, because that's not what you do anymore. You negotiate harder at work, because you know you have options. You think twice before financing something because you understand the real cost of debt. It's not willpower, it's alignment with who you've become. Here's the sixth benefit that nobody talks about. $10,000 creates opportunities that didn't exist before. Maybe you hear about a certification program that could increase your salary by $10,000 annually, but it costs $2,000 upfront. Without savings, this is impossible. With your foundation, it's an obvious investment that pays for itself in 3 months. Or maybe a friend is starting a business and looking for a small investor. Without savings, you can only wish them luck. With 10,000, you have the option to put in 5,000 and potentially participate in something that could change your financial trajectory. I'm not saying you should invest your entire emergency fund in risky ventures, but having options feels completely different from having no options at all. The seventh change is what happens to your career momentum. Financial security doesn't just make you sleep better, it makes you perform better. When you're not constantly worried about money, you have more mental bandwidth for your actual work. You're more creative, you're more focused, You're more willing to take on challenging projects because you're not spending half your energy managing financial anxiety. This often translates into better performance reviews, more recognition, and ultimately higher income, which accelerates your financial progress even more. It's a positive feedback loop that compounds over time. Let's talk about the math for a second, because this is where things get really interesting. Say you're saving $1,000 every month. Getting to your first $10,000 takes about 11 months if you're just saving, or closer to 10 months if you're earning even modest returns in a high-yield savings account. That first $10,000 is brutal, because you're building it from survival mode. Every dollar you save feels like a sacrifice, because you're already stretched thin. But here's what's remarkable. Your second $10,000 doesn't take another 11 months. It takes closer to 9. Why? Because now you have that first $10,000 generating its own returns, even if it's just modest interest. By your third $10,000, the timeline shrinks even more. The same effort yields faster results because you have momentum. This is compound interest, starting to work in your favor, not in some abstract future retirement way, but in a tangible right now way. But perhaps the most significant aspect of having $10,000 saved is this. It proves that wealth building is possible for you. Not theoretical, not something that works for other people. Actually possible. And that psychological proof creates momentum for everything that comes after. Before you hit $10,000, investing seems pointless. What's the point of putting $100 in the stock market when you might need it for an emergency next week? After $10,000, investing becomes logical. Your emergencies are covered. That $100 can actually stay invested long enough to grow. Before $10,000, the idea of building significant wealth feels like fantasy. After $10,000, it feels like following a process you've already proven you can execute. Now let's address what $10,000 is not. It's not retirement. It's not financial independence. It's not generational wealth. You're still working. You still have bills. This isn't the finish line, but it is the starting line. It's the foundation that makes everything else possible. You can't think about investing for retirement when you're terrified of next month. You can't build wealth when you're constantly rebuilding from zero every time something breaks. $10,000 is the moment you stop hemorrhaging. It's the moment you stop running backward and start standing still long enough to look forward. Here's the hard truth. Getting to $10,000 requires sacrifice. It requires saying no to things you want. It requires living below your means for longer than feels fair. It requires acting like the person you're trying to become before you've actually become them. And that's uncomfortable, especially when you're already tired, especially when everyone around you seems to be spending freely. But here's what's on the other side. A version of you that doesn't panic when the check engine light comes on. A version that makes decisions based on what you want, not what you're afraid of. A version that sleeps through the night because your nervous system isn't constantly flooded with financial stress. The average American spends over $3,000 per year on coffee, dining out, and convenience purchases alone. That's not even counting major expenses. If you could redirect just 1/3 of that spending towards savings, you'd have $10,000 in less than 3 years. I'm not saying you should never enjoy a coffee or a meal out. I'm saying most people have more flexibility in their budgets than they realize. The difference between someone who builds savings and someone who doesn't usually comes down to awareness and intentionality, not income level. Here's something that might change your perspective. The person with $10,000 saved is actually closer to financial independence than someone with zero savings, even if that second person earns twice as much. Why? Because the saver has developed the most important wealth-building skill, which isn't earning money, it's keeping money. You probably know people who make 6 figures, but are always broke. Expensive cars, fancy apartments, $20 salads, but zero savings. Meanwhile, someone making $40,000 a year has accumulated substantial savings through intentional spending. The difference isn't income, it's mindset. And reaching $10,000 is a masterclass in developing the right financial mindset. Let me tell you what happens emotionally when you cross this threshold, because that's what actually matters. Before $10,000, there's this constant background hum of anxiety. It's there when you wake up. It's there when you're trying to fall asleep. It's there at work, with friends, when you're trying to enjoy anything. It's a low-frequency dread that something will go wrong and you won't be able to handle it. After $10,000, the hum quiets. Not completely, but enough that you can hear yourself think, enough that you can be present, enough that you can enjoy a meal without mentally calculating whether you can afford it. The relief is physical. Your shoulders relax, your jaw unclenches, your sleep improves, not because $10,000 is magic, but because your nervous system finally has evidence that you can handle disruption. And that changes how you show up everywhere. You're more patient with your family, because you're not constantly stressed. You're more present with your partner, because your mind isn't somewhere else worrying about bills. You're more creative at work, because you have mental bandwidth for something other than survival. You're more yourself. This is why $10,000 matters more than $1 million right now. Because a million is theoretical, it's someday, it's after decades of doing everything right. But 10,000 is achievable, it's soon. It's the difference between the life you're living now and a life where you can actually breathe. So here's what I want you to understand. If you're lying awake worrying about money, it's not because you're weak or anxious or bad at handling stress. It's because your brain is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, keeping you alert to real threats. And without a financial buffer, those threats are real. $10,000 doesn't make the threats disappear, but it makes them manageable. And manageable threats don't steal your sleep, your energy, your ability to think clearly, or your capacity to actually enjoy your life. The path forward is straightforward. Not easy, but straightforward. Save $10,000. Not for anything specific, not for a purchase or a dream. Save it for options, for breathing room, for the ability to make one decision based on what you want, instead of what you're afraid of. Because once you can do that, once you can make even one choice from a place of strategy, instead of survival, everything else becomes possible. The clarity, the confidence, the better decisions, the patience to stick with long-term plans, the resilience to handle setbacks without falling apart. People with $10,000 don't sleep better because they're richer. They sleep better because they've built the foundation that makes every other aspect of financial progress possible. They've proven to themselves that they can control money, instead of being controlled by it. And that proof, that evidence of their own capability, changes everything. $10,000 won't change your life in the dramatic way people talk about on the internet, but it will change your mind. And your mind is where everything starts. Every good decision you'll make, every opportunity you'll take, every risk you'll navigate successfully, it all starts with a brain that has the space to think strategically instead of reactively. So if you're currently staring at a bank balance that's nowhere near 5 figures, don't panic. Start small, stay consistent, and remember, the person you become while saving your first $10,000 is infinitely more valuable than the money itself. That person, the disciplined, patient, strategic version of you, that's who builds real wealth over time. The finish line is somewhere beyond 10,000, but the starting line, the moment where everything actually begins, that's right here.